Hello, and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read-Along. My name is Neil Parekh. I'm the executive producer of the show and occasional guest host, particularly when Sri is celebrating his twins' birthday and his daughter's Autumn Gitram, which is her dance recital. Think of a dance recital and bat mitzvah rolled into one. So we're giving Sri the day off. But I am honored to be guest hosting, and joining me today will be Barry Meier, a longtime Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist and author of Spooked, the Trump Dossier, Black Cube, and the Rise of Private Spies, particularly their role in journalism. He worked at the New York Times for 28 years and was also at the Wall Street Journal and New York Newsday. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We're also live on my channels, on my Facebook and Twitter, and we're also live on our digimentors.group website. Please like, comment, share, retweet, and tell your friends about it. Again, my name is Neil Parekh, and I want to just take a moment to welcome everyone who's joining us. We have Doug Levy joining us at 5:30 a.m. Pacific time. Doug, it is always a pleasure to see you joining us, and it really is, to get up that early. All of our West Coast friends, we really appreciate it. Patricia Freudenberg as well, joining us from New York. Patricia, thank you. Always great to have you. Patricia is watching on LinkedIn. Another favorite and frequent viewer, also watching from the West Coast, my mom. Hi, Mom. How are you? Thank you for watching. It's always great to have loyal watchers and family, of course. My mom even dialed in one day from a taxi after landing from India, which was really interesting. She didn't wait to get home. Miriam Barkley is joining us from Hell's Kitchen. Miriam, so glad to have you join us. And of course, our friend Jonathan Borstein, joining us from the East Village. And my man, Stefan Kaplan, how are you doing? Always great to see you. Stefan, we were talking yesterday over social media weekend, or at least we made reference to when you took me out for pizza on my birthday. It was like 2 or 3 years ago. Definitely looking forward to being able to do that again in the after times. We're getting closer, but we're not quite there yet. Diane Stefani joining us from Margate, New Jersey. She's talking about Social Media Weekend, this conference that we hosted Friday and Saturday. We'll tell you more about that. And stay tuned, because you can still register and watch all of the videos, watch all of the content using a special discount code. So stay tuned and look for more information about that. Naomi Service is joining us. Naomi, thank you. As always, for watching. And Doug is saying Seattle is nice this time of year. Love the long hours of sunlight. Absolutely. We lived in Seattle for 15 years before moving back to the East Coast. And my sister, ironically enough, moved there after we came to the East Coast. So Seattle is a very, very special place in our heart as well. I want to take a moment to thank our team. We wouldn't be able to produce the New York Times Read-Along without a great team behind us. Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, Carla Baranauckas. What we do is we'll have people watch on Facebook, particularly Sri's Facebook account, and add links, engage with the audience, et cetera, to make it a little bit more interactive. We try not to just set up a camera and talk to camera the whole time. But thank you, Paula, for doing that job today and watching several of the channels that we're streaming on. I also want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, MuckRack. MuckRack has been a great partner for the New York Times Read-Along and worked with Sri on a great Fundamentals of Social Media course. So thank you, MuckRack, for your support. If you're interested in being a sponsor, please contact Sri or myself. Our email addresses are on the screen, sri@digimentors.group, or Neil@digimentors.group. We would love to hear from you. I wanted to take a moment and also tell you a little bit about Social Media Weekend, this great conference we have had, and really it wouldn't have been a success without everyone who participated. We had great speakers. As you can see, Brian Stelter from CNN was our opening night speaker. Darlene Slaughter, a former colleague of mine at United Way and now at the March of Dimes, joined us for a panel that I moderated on diversity and inclusion in the digital era. Andrew Seaman joined us from LinkedIn, Ejali Mitchell. Wade Davis gave an incredible talk, and Sarah Evans joined Sri and Andrew for a roundtable on several issues in the opening session in the opening session on Saturday morning rather. As you can see here, in terms of the people, these are just the speakers in terms of where they came from. NPR, Vox Media, the New York Times. Sona Patel joined us Friday evening. She's the director of engagement at the New York Times. It was incredible to hear about her work. We had people from the Red Cross, from LinkedIn, from the Associated Press, as you can see. So if you are still interested, as I mentioned earlier, you can still register. All of the content will be available on the website for about 6 months. So for the next 2 weeks, you have a 2-week window. You can register and use NYT Read Along as a discount code to have access to all the great content, all the videos, and you can still interact with other attendees, with guests, see what it's like to put on a show like that. Just in terms of the structure, we used Whova as a conference platform, which many people really appreciated. It really worked for what we were doing. So I definitely encourage you to go to smweekend.com, smwknd.com, and click on the link to register. Use the discount code. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We'd love to have you watch some of the programs. A few other people have checked in, so we'll just say hi to folks. Let's see, Dr. Sojna Chandrasheker is here, and she's also saying it was an amazing social media weekend. Thank you. And exactly, that's her question. Can people still sign up? Absolutely. We would definitely love for people to do that. Jonathan also saying that it was a fantastic conference. And looking into Rome. So Jeremy Kaplan, one of our speakers, and he has spoken at several social media weekend conferences, always does a great presentation on a number of tools that you can use for apps and for your websites. That's certainly a good example of a presentation you want to go back and watch multiple times. You want to pause, check out the site that he's recommending, and then go back. So certainly, Jonathan, great recommendation. Doug is also chiming in on Jeremy's talk. And Patricia, you are welcome. Sorry you were out of town, but you can always go back and watch all of the shows. So that would be great. With that, I want to remind you that our guest today is going to be Barry Meier. Barry Meier is a longtime prize-winning investigative journalist, and he's the author of Spooked, the Trump Dossier, Black Cube, and the Rise of Private Spies. He worked at the New York Times for 28 years and was also at the Wall Street Journal and New York Newsday. We will visit with Barry in just a bit. We'll bring him on. But what I want to do first is show you what's in the paper today and give you a sense of the different sections that we are going to be discussing. So let's take a look at that real quick. And then we will bring on Barry. And just as a heads up, we might get a surprise. I saw my wife and daughter just drive in. They were at an overnight Girl Scout trip. So we'll see if they come in through that door in just a moment. Hopefully my wife will know to come through the front door, because I know she doesn't want to be on camera, particularly after an overnight. So let's just take a quick scan of the front pages before bringing on our guest. The front page above the fold, the misery of life under occupation, is the display story. Daily indignities mount for Palestinians, steadily fueling a conflict. The lead stories, the world is facing first long slide in its population. We'll certainly take a look at that. The combination of declines in birth rates and extending life. We have an older and an aging population. It'll be very interesting to see the impacts of that long term. Also, as prices rise, Biden and Fed see a rebound. Below the fold is story about the windfall for Black farmers, Royals Rural America, their attempts to address years of systemic racism and institutional racism. There are folks that are pushing back on that. How the police are exonerated by a grand jury, and saving kangaroos endangers a way of life in the outback. So that's the front page. And we'll see. I think I hear the door opening. I think we might get a visitor. We'll see. Or she might go at the front door. I think she's going to the front door. We have a special section on museums that we definitely want to take a look at. Sunday Styles, Big Candy takes on THC treats. If you're not familiar with THC, that's the prime ingredient in cannabis products. And there's a concern that Big Candy effectively is concerned that a lot of treats are being made to look like candy. So we'll take a look at that. The Sunday Business section, what women lost, specifically during the pandemic. In the United States, 1.3 million mothers are out of work because of the pandemic. The absence of a paycheck has been a blow, not just to their finances, but also to their identities. We have the Sunday Review section. It is 1 year since the murder of George Floyd. We spoke about that at Social Media Weekend during the conference on the session on diversity and inclusion. We'll certainly take a look at this. A great cover if you take a look at the front page. An outpouring of grief was followed by a summer of righteous anger and peaceful protest, but racism is resilient. America remains divided. What comes next? The book review features Daniel Patrick Moynihan on the cover. Of course, he passed away, but this is a book about the former senator, the longtime senator from New York. The at-home section is always fun. Great color, great display. We're getting back into swim. We're saying goodbye to the quarantine pod. We're trying out a whole new style. And we're helping our parents with the long-delayed chores. When we're set up there, and when we've set up their new passwords, we'll make a pinwheel cake topper out of newspaper and have a party. Always like the home section. And yes, it looks like we are getting back to pools. We did not go to the pool last year, but we will be going to our neighborhood pool this year, and they open up next weekend. Arts and Leisure is a feature a year after another feature about George Floyd. A year after the murder of George Floyd, we can look to the arts and artists to capture what has changed and what hasn't, bearing witness, and that's the cover image, which is definitely interesting. And finally, a very, very interesting cover story in the New York Times Magazine, How America Spends. They focused on 6 families. 6 families gave them access to their budgets and their expenses so that we can have an analysis of what their spending habits are like. So that'll be something you'll want to spend time on this evening. Again, we have a number of people who have joined us. I just want to say hi to folks. Deborah Kerr joining us from Fort Lauderdale, and let's see who else has joined us here, and yeah, and that's Deborah Kerr is joining us on Facebook as well. So that's great. So thank you very much. And now, without further ado, we're going to have Barry Meier join us to talk about his book Spooked. Again, Barry Meier is the author of Spooked, and we'll bring him on the stage shortly. Barry, good to see you.
Neil, good to see you as well. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Great job with the green screen behind you. Really,
yes,
very,
it's
very green.
as you can see, it's a very deep green screen.
Barry's actually outside. And just lovely backdrop. You said it rained a lot, so everything is looking really fresh. So the question that we like to ask all of our guests as soon as we bring them on, just to lay the groundwork, is effectively how you doing. The last year, almost 3 months with the pandemic. We can only hope that family and friends remained relatively healthy. How did you get by over the last year?
Well, we were very lucky in many ways. All of us are fine. None of us became ill thus far. And normally I'm in Manhattan in our 35th floor apartment, but my wife and I decided after sheltering there during the first 2 months of the pandemic that we really didn't want to ride up and down an elevator several times a day and expose ourselves that way. So we've often come up to a small town in Western Massachusetts and found a cottage there to rent, which is where we are now. So we've spent more or less much of the year up here, enduring really a freezing winter, and now enjoying the spring. So all in all, no complaints on this end.
That's great. And you have a book that's coming out, or that came out rather. Did you spend pandemic year working on the book? Talk us through the timeline in terms of the writing and the editing process.
Sure thing. So I started working on Spooked, I believe it was in 2018 or 19 or late 2018. And I was fortunate to be able to get most of my reporting completed before the pandemic struck. I was able to travel to England. I went to Moscow. I went to other places. So all of my interviews were largely complete when the pandemic began. So, I have no idea what would have happened if I was just starting out on the reporting and unable to travel. So, as often happens, adverse conditions provide an opportunity to hunker down if you're working on a very singular and insular project. So I did a lot of the writing in New York before the pandemic. And then when we came up here, I continued to write up here. So I spent much of this past year working on the book.
That's great. And so then when did it come out? Earlier this year?
It came out a few weeks ago in England.
Just a few weeks.
It came out on Tuesday, just, I don't know, what is that, 5-6 days ago here in the US. Yeah, it's just out.
That's great. And already has some good reviews. Johnny Diamond from the Literary Hub editor-in-chief. Spooked is a fascinating account of just how far the modern surveillance state has leached in the private sector and into private lives. And then Oliver, and you'll help me with pronunciation, it's Bullo?
Bullo, correct.
Bullo. A truly alarming glimpse into how the information market has become turbocharged by dark money, loose morals, and oligarchic feuds. I would highly recommend reading it. So tell us a little bit about the book. It's effectively, it's around private investigators and their relationships with journalists. You had a great piece in the New York Times last week, which was a cover of the Sunday business section. We covered that in last week's edition of the show, Secret Shares, the Hidden Ties Between Private Spies and Journalists. Tell us a little bit more about what the book is about.
So most of us, including myself, often think of spies, in the traditional espionage sense. It's the CIA, it's MI6, it's KGB, what have you. And what Spooked is about is the private business of spying, this industry that has truly boomed over the past decade, where corporate intelligence, private intelligence, however they want to describe themselves, firms are available to essentially investigate and spy for private clients. And that includes everyone from businesses to Hollywood, to the wealthy individuals, to political parties, you name it. So essentially, it's about how the wealthy, the powerful, the controversial are now tapping into this new weapon to defend themselves, or in many cases, smear or intimidate their opponents.
And what are some of the examples that you focused on? And what are the most egregious examples?
There are many egregious examples. Fortunately, I had to limit them for the purposes of the book, not to make it too confusing. But the book is told through characters, and you kind of follow these characters over time, and you see the various escapades and events that they get involved in. So it's very much kind of structured like a spy story. And some of the main, high points are, the dossier, the Steele dossier, which became, an obsession of the media after the 2016 election, the Harvey Weinstein case, this rather hilarious escapade where an operative disguised himself as a documentary film producer and infiltrated the ranks of public health activists. And so I'm really trying to compose the book in a way that you see these characters, you understand the characters, and then you follow them through into this world that they occupy.
And were you surprised by what you found, or and when you got into the details? I mean, you obviously you had an idea, you had a direction you wanted to go in. Presumably, you did some of your research, you started learning more. Did it confirm your worst fears? Were you gobsmacked, as folks across the pond might say, by what you found?
Well, sort of I guess the inspiration from the book, traces back to early 2018, late 2019, when I left the New York Times after I retired. And right around that time, there were a number of big stories that were breaking out. The dossier story, the Harvey Weinstein story, the Theranos scandal had just occurred. And sort of, I realized looking at them that there was kind of this hidden thread that connected these stories, and that was the involvement of private intelligence agencies or private spies in all of them. And I thought to myself, maybe it'd be a great idea to kind of flip the script and start investigating these investigators. So that was kind of the inspiration for going on this journey. And, what I discovered going out, while I was on it and not too late into it, was that we're dealing with this powerful, renegade, mercenary industry that's, invading our privacy, profiting from deception, and influencing the media in ways about which we had no idea.
And Patricia Freudberg actually had asked the question right when you were talking about it. She was asking what was the inspiration for your latest book, so the timing couldn't have been better. But she also wanted to know, did you have a favorite chapter? Do you have a favorite story or a favorite villain, if you will?
Writers think all their chapters are wonderful. I'll just say that as a general rule of thumb. Yeah, I mean, it's, I couldn't be more impressed with every chapter. One of the chapters that, as you said, was kind of gobsmacking and revelatory to me is a chapter that deals with the scandals surrounding Theranos, this once high-flying Silicon Valley company that claimed to develop a revolutionary blood testing technology. So in 2015, a Wall Street Journal reporter by the name of John Carreyrou, who would become famous for his work, eventually uncovering fraud at Theranos and went on to write a best-selling book called Bad Blood, began to investigate the company. And the company, at a certain point, hires Fusion GPS, which is a investigations firm headed by two former Wall Street Journal reporters. And they begin interacting with John. And I then was able to gain access to emails showing that at a certain point in this relationship, they started using an intermediary, a cutout, if you will, to start monitoring informational requests that John was making to public agencies about Theranos. So essentially, they were covertly monitoring him and tracking him to find out who he was talking with, whom he was interacting with. And, I found that personally shocking, as a journalist, that you had these two former journalists using these types of tactics. And, John is quoted in the book saying he thought the whole thing was disgusting. And there are lots of journalists that would share that viewpoint.
You're an investigative journalist, right? By your career, by training. I mean, there's obviously lines that you draw, that anyone draws in terms of doing their work. How is this different in terms of, is your goal as an investigative journalist to use every means at your disposal to get at the truth, to get at what get at the subject, et cetera?
I think my goal was always, as an investigative reporter, to maintain a high level of ethical behavior. And within the private spying industry, there is no ethical standard of behavior. Just to give you a perfect example, Black Cube, this notorious Israeli private spying company, will send its operatives out under disguises. They will create digital identities for them, phony Facebook pages, phony LinkedIn pages, phony names, and will approach their targets under pretexts. And, the idea that someone who is a journalist would do that is insane. I mean, one would get fired if your employer found out that you did that, and one would be deserved to being fired if someone found out that you did that. It's been always my thought that when one starts a story or when one starts a book, as I did in this case, is to try to interact with the subjects as early as possible in the proceedings. So, I contacted Glenn Simpson and Peter Fritsch at Fusion GPS pretty much right away. I contacted Black Cube right away. I contacted these other private intelligence agencies right away because, you're hoping to get their input. You're eager to get their input, and you want to show them that you want to get their input. So, these are businesses, companies that will do things that most journalists would be horrified by the thought of doing.
And of course, I'm hoping you understood that question to be the setup that it was. By no means meaning to impugn your character, but I think at the same time, it is important to make that point and draw that very clear distinction. The role of ethics in journalism, the standards that you and others hold themselves to. Is it safe to say that the subjects of your book, former journalists themselves, are the exceptions, not the rule?
Well, they're no longer journalists. I mean, for example,
Sure.
The people at Fusion GPS, their kind of marketing motto was, quote, journalism for rent, unquote. And
no longer journalists at that point.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, journalists don't rent themselves out. And the people that do are no longer journalists.
Absolutely.
And that's basically the long and short of it.
And Patricia put up this comment earlier. She's buying the book just based on that earlier response, I think, to that question about ethics in journalism. So we made one sale at least, Barry.
Maybe she can send me the exact quote, and I will use it in every chat that I have going forward.
I think it might help. You need the setup, though, right? You need someone to ask the question to get the quote. But we can work on that.
I can always say, well, someone once asked me.
Someone.
And
Carla, who was a colleague of yours at the New York Times, and again, we want to thank Carla for her help in bringing you to the show, asked, what did it feel like when you were trying to track down Christopher Steele? Did you feel like a spy? And just to remind for folks, Christopher Steele was behind the dossier to his name, the Steele Dossier, which was a collection of material that was thought to show how former President Donald Trump had been compromised, in Russian. So did you feel like a spy when you were trying to track him down?
Well, let me try to sell another copy of the book by describing the beginning, which is actually quite funny, and it was I had a great time doing this. So the people at Fusion GPS told me they weren't going to talk to me. They pretty much made that clear straight off the bat. But Christopher Steele did not respond to messages I sent him through email or text messages over like encrypted apps. And so I figured, well, I've got to go see this guy. And so, here I am, I'm old, but I got to go out and find him and knock on his door and whatever. So I had met this like really old and famous British private eye by the name of Ian Withers, who now lives in Northern Ireland, who spent his entire career, like camping outside people's houses, following them, using surveillance vans to monitor them. So I called up Ian and I said, Ian, what about if we got together and we kind of like tried to find Christopher Steele and staked out his house so I could go knock on his door. So the book kind of starts out with, I guess it's sort of a little bit of a romp where you join Ian and I, in this small town, Farnham, about an hour south of London, kind of searching for Christopher Steele's house. Eventually discovering it after a couple of misadventures, and then my knocking on Christopher Steele's door and him coming to it dressed in his boxer shorts, a t-shirt, with a very, very bad case of bedhead, and telling me that, he can't talk to me today because it's his birthday. And that turned out to be true, but it also turned out that he didn't want to talk to me on any other day either.
Of course, that certainly makes sense. Following up on that conversation about ethics, our friend Dr. Sojna Chandrasheker, the host of a show that will air at 11 o'clock this morning, she is on call, said I think a lot of people don't understand the strength of ethics in journalism, and that this was an important conversation. When you've had other conversations about the book, is the focus on more the salacious details and the stories, the Theranos and Steele dossier, the showing up at the guy's house and him answering in his boxers? Or are people using this to open up that conversation about ethics? I could see Poynter doing some really great sessions at the Poynter Institute for Journalism in Florida. Talk about that a little bit.
I would hope that people would use this opportunity, maybe read the book and think about what it means for how we go about our jobs as journalists. Even though I'm not employed by the New York Times anymore, I still consider myself a journalist. I still adhere to the ethics of journalism. And in some ways, the, kind of reconstructing or deconstructing what happened with the embrace of the Steele dossier by journalists was kind of eye-opening, disheartening, and troubling about our own profession. And what is even more sort of remarkable is the ability of, or lack of ability, of many journalists to kind of say, you know what, maybe we screwed up here. Maybe we blew this up out of context. And what are we going to learn from this? What do we take away from this? How do we behave in the future going forward so that we don't fall into this again? Because to me, one of the troubling aspects of the Steele dossier was the damage that it did to journalism. And you know, it just, in the long run, made more people skeptical about journalism. And I am a great believer in journalism. I'm honored to have spent my career in journalism. And to me, it's extraordinarily important that we as journalists acknowledge our mistakes, be transparent about them, and restore the trust of readers or viewers.
That's great. Thank you very much. And just a follow-up, Patricia will be sending that quote so that you can sell a few more books.
So thanks, Patricia.
Patricia, if you want to send that to me, we'll certainly make sure we can get that into Barry's hands. My mom is giving you props for your persistence in going to that guy's house. Any plans to make it in a movie? Have people started calling you yet? Has Hollywood come knocking on your door?
Well, first of all, thank you to your mom. So the film and television rights to Spooked have already been acquired by a major studio, which I'm not allowed to divulge their name, but yes, it was acquired even before the book appeared in the United States.
That's great. Absolutely. If they need me to play you, I'm happy to step in. Just let me know.
You're just gonna have to shave your. You're gonna have to shave your head.
We'll see. We'll see about that. I know my mom might actually object to that. She's she's always giving me grief about my hair. Hopefully it looks okay today, Mom. Tell me. You can send me a WhatsApp message later, which you probably will. But with that, I also want to say hi to Ellen joining us from New York. And Ellen, if you missed it earlier, our guest is Barry Meier. Barry Meier is the author of Spooked. He's a longtime Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, a journalist with ethics, and retaining his ethics in his retirement from journalism. Spooked is about the Trump Dossier, Black Cube, and the rise of private spies. And he was at the Times for 28 years. It was also at the Wall Street Journal and New York Newsday. So I certainly encourage you and anyone else who may have joined us late to go back and watch the show. Watch the first, definitely be informative. And one of the good things is we finished the show. You can actually watch from the beginning. It's also playing on our website, digimentors.group. You can find it there, and you can watch that anytime as well. So with that, Barry, I want to get into the newspaper and see what we have on.
And I'm gonna nosh on a pastry while you do that.
Please nosh on a pastry. That would be great. I'm a little jealous. I'm hoping you brought some to share with folks. Let's take a look at that. Yeah, let's get that pastry in there.
It's from the farmer's market.
Oh yeah, good. Nice. So as far as the paper is concerned, and we'll keep you on the screen just on the side. So if you see something that catches your attention, please feel free to let us know. And you can always stop me and say, go back. And Ellen is reminding me, she does know who you are. But Ellen, that was also for anyone else who may have joined, of course. But thank you, Ellen. Do hope that you get a chance to go back. And Ellen does endorse the typecasting. So I got one vote. You got a book, and I got a vote. So we'll keep track.
It's out of our hands.
It's out of our hands.
It's out of our hands.
Harrison Ford would do much better. So the front page, the display story, and one of the things that is always interesting the dominant photo on the left, the display story, the lead on the right. But when you look at the website, and particularly if you look at a link called Today's Papers, and hopefully Paula can share that link for folks, on the New York Times, Today's Papers is an accurate reflection of the articles that are in that day's print edition. Right, the website is constantly being updated and new things are being added, but the paper still goes to bed at some point. And this is a fixed. I mean, this is paper, right? You can't change it afterward. So that website shows you exactly what's in the paper. And what's always interesting is that online, the display story is on the right-hand side, a little smaller, and the lead story gets a dominant picture and shows it on the left-hand side. So this is one thing I thought I'd point out. We talked about the stories on the front page earlier. Let's take a look at what's inside. The Times Insider column, Inside the Times, which is always my favorite, is about working moms who paid a price. That's the story in the business section. And this is a backgrounder. This is a piece by Bethany Mollenkoff, who is a freelance photographer, talking about her work on that piece. The headline in History, if you can make that out, tidal wave sweeps away 130 as new quakes raise Chile toll. And that was from 1960, May 23rd, 1960. The Times reported on a rash of earthquakes that would rock Chile for days, triggering tidal waves in the Pacific that killed people in places as far as Hawaii and Japan. An estimated 1,600 people died, and 2 million were left homeless. On the top right of the page, they show some of the items in the paper that you might want to check out. Nevada is the worst state in the nation for poor people seeking housing, with only 2 affordable and available rental units for every 10 extremely low-income households. Lonely people are more likely to have heart attacks and cancer and alcoholism and even common colds. Loneliness is an emergency. That's an article in the book review, and certainly something that people dealt with during the pandemic this last year. I made reference to the cover story in the Sunday Styles. The accessibility of marijuana-infused edibles and the discretion they afford has made them the fastest growing category of cannabis, according to Surfside, a cannabis data analytics company. And that article is actually highlighting the fact that Big Candy is concerned because these products are being made to look like candy. And then, as I mentioned, the cover of the book review, before he was elected to the Senate in 1976, Daniel Patrick Moynihan ran for city council president in New York and lost in the Democratic primary. That's an interesting bit of his political history. And then from the arts and leisure section, organizers and volunteers with Memorialize the Movement, a project to preserve and exhibit the plywood sheets that business owners had affixed to their storefronts during the George Floyd protests last year, have gathered more than 800 boards. That is certainly interesting. One of the things that we want to point out is for almost 100 years, the Tiffanys had the ad in the top right corner. And Stuart Elliott was a former guest on this show, and he pointed out that they had paid extra to have this particular spot. About a month or two ago now, they relinquished that spot under new ownership. But what was interesting is that for several weeks, they actually had an ad on the front page of the Sunday paper and on the back page as well. So it looks like they're still experimenting with what their presence will be in the Times. So we'll go ahead and check out the rest of the paper. Barry, of course, if there's anything that jumps out at you, let me know.
My ears perked up at the name of Stuart Elliott, who was a wonderful colleague, and as I am, a long-suffering Mets fan.
My apologies, Barry. I feel so bad for you.
Yes, it's condolences, I think would be the right word.
Condolences are absolutely the right word. And if I had known, I would have worn my Yankee jersey just for you. Go Yankees. If I was producing the show, this is the moment in time when I would take producers. I mean, I'm producing and hosting. I'd be typing in a Go Yankees scroller across the bottom just to play. But yeah, Stuart Elliott was great. Yeah, it was fascinating to get his insights on the paper. Nothing like a good long hug, even if it's strange at first. The tracking an outbreak page, as people are emerging from isolation, you see people are hugging again, which is great. I know I'm a double vaccinated. My wife is as well, and we had we've started seeing people a little bit, but it's still a little bit with the CDC guidance. We're still not sure. We're still taking a little bit cautious just in terms of how fast we emerge and how quickly we're willing to return to normal. Here's another story for colleges. Inoculation mandates often hinge on the party in power. Private vaccine sales show depth of a rich-poor divide. That's not necessarily surprising. There's also the divide with people of color in terms of getting access to vaccinations. In the Russian Arctic, a frosty military campaign pushing into areas once frozen solid. This is a new base as the Arctic is warming. Not only are our countries, particularly Russia, able to sail through once what used to be frozen waters, now they're setting up bases in the far north. And here's another story about haven't had your shot yet, then come aboard the magic bus. As the vaccine is now available to kids, I believe it's up to after 12-year-olds and higher. The focus is shifting to schools and outreach to kids. And so there's a shot of the bus, if you can make it out, with some spaces for people to get vaccine shots. This might be volunteers at a mobile clinic in St. Paul, Minnesota. If you can just barely make that out, I think. Fortress of Zion, inside the secretive bunker Israel built for aerial wars. They used that in the recent exchange with the Palestinians in the Gaza and the West Bank. This is a larger story, life under occupation, daily indignities fuel crisis, about the West Bank and Gaza. Here's interesting, the U.S. nuclear war that almost happened. New details on 1955 China standoff. The nuclear arms race was always a big interest to me growing up. I remember in the early 80s, I am still trying to remember exactly why I was thinking this, but I presumed that we would have a nuclear war in a couple of years. It seemed that dire. Certainly not nothing like the Cuban Missile Crisis for a generation ago. But I remember, seeing a list of where the Olympics would be in 4 years and 8 years, and thinking, yeah, if we're still here, if we're still around, and apparently there was a standoff in '58. We should definitely look into. Here's an article about in Sweden, a new spaceport takes shape where reindeer roam. Europe's first entry in commercial race. Had you seen this article, Barry?
I see it now, and I glanced at it early this morning, and it reminds me of this sort of futuristic place. There was a great story I came across when I was working on the book about the Seychelles, these exotic islands off in the Indian Ocean, and how there was a U.S. satellite tracking station there for many years, and the Seychelles became like this hotbed of spies from the U.S., Russia, and elsewhere. And it's always good to see where there's hidden missile silos and rocket launchers and all kinds of cool things like that.
And you mentioned you'd seen it on your phone, right?
Yes.
Patricia wants to know, do you prefer paper or digital?
I am a dinosaur, so I really enjoy the paper, I'm living in an area or spending a lot of my time in an area where it's difficult to get the paper. When I'm in Manhattan, we get the paper. So I've, particularly in the past year, shifted more to digital. But one of the disadvantages I've found from digital is the inability to do what you're doing right now, which is to basically work your way kind of slowly through the paper and then stumble onto a gem that you wouldn't have found if you hadn't manually gone through the paper. And because most people tend to just flip on the home screen, look at the home page, look at the 7 or 8 stories that are up there, and that's it. That's the extent of their engagement. And it's this kind of discovery that, the surprise discoveries that going through the paper version of the paper provides you that I always enjoy.
Absolutely. Serendipity is really important in that process. I mean, when you're online, I mean, there's so much to love about online. You can do many more things with the design and layout, and have rich information, linked to videos in detail. But typically, you'll find stuff online that you're actually searching for, or that come up in your news feeds, in your Twitter or Facebook, etc. It is from flipping through the paper that you happen to fall on an article. I mean, even before joining the read along, Sri has been doing this for 5 years, 5.5 years now, and I've been producing the show for about 3. But even before that, I would flip through the paper, and I would, my natural way of reading is to focus on the captions and the pull quotes, the graphics, things that caught my eye. And I always found articles that I never would have read otherwise. We look for that balance. I mean, this is the Sunday New York Times read along, as our viewers know, as our loyal viewers know, is a celebration of print. It's a celebration of the New York Times. But we do show things online when it makes sense, when it adds something to the conversation. As we're discussing, I do want to acknowledge that Real Shri is checking in. So when Shri is, when I'm guest hosting, Shri will comment using Real Shri, so we know the difference. Thank you very much. He wants to thank you for joining us, Barry.
And thank him, and congratulations to him on all the kind of joyous events of the day.
Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, it's for Sri's kids, it's their birthday. He has twins, and it's also his daughter's Autumn Gitram, which is a dance recital after years of Indian dance, kind of a combination of a dance recital and bat mitzvah all in one. So Sri, definitely enjoy the time with your family. Appreciate you checking in. And if you happen to be able to share, let folks know about the show, that'd be great as well. Going back to our brief discussion about baseball, I do want to acknowledge that Carla threw in a win Twins, and that our friend Mark Lee from North Carolina is a long-suffering Brewers fan. So for folks who may not be familiar, if you're from outside the United States, we do have an international audience. We tend to, we don't spend a lot of time with the sports pages. We try and keep it as broad as possible. But if I'm on the show, the Yankees are going to come up. That's just the natural course of things, and they're on a good winning streak the last few days. So I'm a little more hopeful than I was in the beginning of the season. We have a couple other folks have checked in. Kathleen Brill saying good morning. And so she's acknowledging, I was talking about earlier about this sense that I had around nuclear Armageddon, that the early 80s were intense. And she did one of her high school papers on preventing nuclear war. So that's interesting. Barry, I don't know if you happen to have any recollection of that or thoughts of that time period. I'm thinking like 82, 85 or thereabouts.
Well, I'm of an earlier generation.
True.
And for my generation, nuclear war was not just there at the moment. it was hanging over our heads all the time. We did duck and cover drills in school, as though hiding under a desk was going to save you from an atomic blast. And I remember very clearly, because I'm extremely paranoid and anxious, that I, hid a couple of cans of tuna fish under my bed when I was a kid. So there, I'd have a little stockpile. It was like the equivalent of my bomb shelter in case there was a war. So yes, it was very much a presence in my life when I was a kid.
That was earlier. I'm curious if is this something that kids experienced, or being Generation X and with Kathleen remembering that same period. I guess I was thinking more as an adult in the early 80s. Was this something that was also, was it a redux? Was it a repeat of what you were experiencing when you were younger, or was this something that were fears of younger children, that's not how adults saw the world?
Well, we all get traumatized at different points in our lives. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that trauma gets revisited or triggered by mm-hmm. subsequent events. And I think, my trauma over nuclear war and annihilation was so intense when I was young that it was really hard for anything subsequent to beat that, other than the real thing. So, I sort of had it, I lived it, and I guess then it was up to younger people like yourself to go through your own version of it in the 80s.
Sure. Thank you, Barry. Thank you for that. Let's go ahead and look at the rest of the paper and see what we have going on. We talked about that spaceport in Sweden. The rest of the front page section has this interesting article on the population decline and some of the impacts that will have on just in terms of the ratio of young workers and older retirees, but less of a demand on resources. We've seen major impacts on nation states, on France and Japan, when their populations decline. So this will be interesting in terms of over the next 50 to, I think, 100 years is what they're thinking about. Here is this article about Black farmers, this attempt to address years of institutional racism, getting a lot of pushback from white farmers across the country, roiling rural America, as the headline says. Keep flipping through. Here's a story that we'll want to take a look at later, how the grand jury cleared police officers in a black man's death. And then one of the things that's always interesting to me from a layout perspective, so the front page section, when it goes over 24 pages, it actually gets split in two, if you can see that. So you literally, when you get the paper is actually kind of nestled in. And oftentimes, when I'm reading the paper, when I look at this, it's natural to look at kind of what's on this second section that becomes a little bit more prominent. And it's not necessarily intentional, just the way the pages fall. Navajo Nation becomes largest tribe in the U.S. And the section on politics, and now the obituaries. Always so much to learn from the obituaries. Barry, are you a fan of the obituaries? Do you read them?
Just so long as I'm not in them.
As long as you're not in them.
Yes. But yes, I mean, is that
why you read them, Barry, to make sure you're not?
Some of the some of the best stories in the Times are obituaries. I have like incredible admiration for all the obituary writers and the way they are able to bring you, these mini biographies of people's lives and the fascinating or extraordinary or notorious things that they did during their lives. And, it's remarkable. They're remarkable, and I love to read them.
Terence Reilly, an architectural force in the museum world, dead at 66. Joan Shankar, a playwright turned biographer. This one is by Neil Genslinger. He was a guest on our show last fall. So we've actually had several people from the Times. Yitzhak Arad, 94, survivor who led Holocaust Study Center in Israel, also passed away.
And as your listeners and viewers might be aware, there's a wonderful documentary about the New York Times obituary page and the team that puts it together that was made a couple of years ago.
Absolutely. Definitely an interesting process. The other thing that I'm looking for right now is the Overlooked series. So we'll take a look at that real quick. This is a series of obituaries that the New York Times has put together of people of color, of women who were overlooked in the papers over time. So we'll just take a quick look at that. This is their website. Since 1851, obituaries in the New York Times have been dominated by white men. Now we're adding the stories of other remarkable people. So it starts off with Ida B. Wells, who took on racism in the Deep South. I'll see if I can make that a little bigger for you so folks can read that. So that's Ida B. Wells and Hui Jin, a feminist poet and revolutionary. It sounds like a jet behind you, Barry. What's going on?
It's a motorcycle. It's this road where we rented a cottage on has very popular with motorcyclists.
Sure.
Yeah.
And earlier, I think I also heard crickets in the background.
That could well be true.
Cicadas coming out.
Yeah, the coyotes, if you stick around for 12 hours, you'll get the coyotes as well.
Mary Ewing Outerbridge, Diane Arbus, and several others. Marsha Johnson, transgender pioneer and activist who was a fixture of Greenwich Village street life. We actually had Amy Padnani on the show. She's the one that spearheaded the Overlooked series. So that was also great. As we take a look at the rest of the section, the New York Times also has, you can still celebrate a life, memorialize people in the pages, and people certainly avail themselves of that opportunity. You can see that right here. And of course, if anyone is interested in honoring the memory of someone who has passed, there's a great new app called Missugram, MISSUGRAM, available on iOS that you can use to do that. So check that out if you can. You see the sports pages are tucked in to the front page in outside New York. They're not their own section. Real estate is not its own section. Metro is not its own section. I think Metro usually gets 2 pages. Here's New York. Of course, they don't call it Metro down here. For those who don't know, I'm based in Springfield, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. But this is where the front page ends. So with that, we have another 25 minutes with Barry to look at the rest of the paper. And we want to have you guide us a little bit. Barry, what is your favorite section? What do you read first?
Well, obviously, I check out the main news stories of the day. What's up on the website or what's in the physical paper. I was interested in the story about the slow population decline, and I think my wife and I are contributors to that since we've only had one child. So this is ultimately a story about us and other people like us. And I'm really eager to read, and I may actually drive into town to buy it, the New York Magazine, the story in the magazine section.
Magazine? Let's go
yes,
there.
About family spending.
Yes.
Because both my wife and my daughter have really gone to great lengths to hide their spending from me, the various things that they spend money on. And I'd like to, maybe this is going to give me some clues to where it's all going.
It sounds like there's a lot going on there, Barry. That might be a different show that we might want to have you on. We do a call-in show where we help people like you work through. No, I'm kidding. But what's interesting about this is that what they did, they had 6 families track their expenses, and in a interesting bit of journalism, an interesting approach, full transparency. They had full access to all of their data.
It's really it's a brilliant concept. It's a fascinating idea, and I'm really eager to see it because I'm sure I would suspect that they took families from different economic and social stratas, so that we can see, how people in different places with different incomes or what have you spend their money, and that those differences are going to be the fascinating part of it.
Ellen is curious if your wife works as well.
She does indeed. She is the business editor of the New York Times and has been for about the past 4 years, I believe.
So we'll have to have you both on one day to work through some of these issues.
Yeah.
Ellen, if you want to join me in that, let me know. We can maybe help this family in working through some of these issues. This is interesting in terms of the layout. I'm always interested in terms of when they take a different approach in terms of design and fonts and graphics. The money diaries. These are the different families, and I think what they're showing is how much they spend per month. Might be as the government prepared another round of stimulus checks and the pandemic began to ease. We have 6 families to track what they spent over the course of a month. What we got through their stories of splurges and sacrifice is an intimate accounting of what they valued most during this unprecedented period in American history. So you can see right there in terms of, you're talking about taking families from various socioeconomic levels. 11,000 a month is certainly high, down to 4,000 a month. It'll be interesting to see what these families are. So the desperate Bibas family over here at 8,000 a month, and you actually see detail. And this is the thing, they gave the Times access. It's hard for you to read it, but it's how much they spend on mortgage, utilities, cell phone, credit cards, and my assumption that may be debt or maybe their payments, health insurance, life insurance, groceries, clothing, personal care, school supplies, books, pest control, kids activities, rentals, and video games. And certainly an interesting, some graphics, some details on all of the sections. So again, if you can get in there, and focus may not be great, but a whole section. So pest control, somebody comes over to put out bait. They said the attic needs to be cleaned out. That's the major problem. I mean, my daughter stepped on a baby mouse on the second floor. Oof. I have OCD. I'm very clean, and it's just there's mice. So that, I mean, talk about intimate portraits of life. And it looks like her daughter is a Girl Scout. My daughter is a Girl Scout as well. A little solidarity there. The Tran family, they're at the upper end, 11,000. And here's so they obviously have a baby. If you see in the lower right corner, the top right corner is the baby, and it's great shot. She's surrounded, he or she can't tell, surrounded by diapers, which I'd be surprised if it's not a line item in and of itself. But what I want to point out is this image normalizing pumping, which I think is great to see. On the left-hand side, certainly multitasking, and the father holding the baby. I think that's personally, and just like to say, I think that's a great shot to show folks. Laura Silverman is saying the Money Diaries article is fascinating. The choices people make and the choices that are available to them are so diverse. And Paula agrees. Paula, of course, one of our producers, that she loves the inclusion of the mom pumping. Been there, done that. Certainly, anyone with kids understands, and it's not easy, and it's challenging, and society doesn't make it easy necessarily. Diana says she loves the Money Diaries layout as well. Some good kudos for the Times. We'll certainly pass it on to their design team. The Campbell family, some glimpses of their life as well. And the Coleman Stewart Isaacs family, 10,000 a month. So you can see kind of what that distribution looks like. They include a line item for investments and savings, which is great to see. And again, let's just take a moment. This is at the high end of the spectrum. And there's some, I'll say there's some intentionality here. You can see the diversity in terms of the families. This picture looks like she might be a single mom. I don't see another parent in the picture. A young couple, certainly Asian American. But this is the kind of thing that I think 15 years ago or so, it would have been too easy for the family who was at the lower end of the spectrum to be African American or people of color. So kudos again. This is not what you would expect. Shows a little bit of thought at least, which is good. So just wanted some kudos for that. Our friend Ron Thomas is checking in from Dubai. Ron, always a pleasure to have you join us. And the Chavez Padilla family. So it looks interesting as well. And I'm just looking at the pictures. It looks like they're maybe involved. The brewing company. No, that's part of the story. Looks like might be involved in agriculture. At the lower end of the spectrum, maybe $4,800 a month. But a very, very well apportioned, well maintained house. No assumptions for what people's lives are like. This is great. And then there's another. This is the Road to Recovery follow up on that in terms of the stimulus payments that are coming out. Barry, we have a question from Carla that we want to pose to you. Mm-hmm. And you've always been a hard-driving journalist. How important are awards to you? You are a Pulitzer Prize winner and a George Polk Award winner. How important is the awards?
Well, they were very gratifying. That's for sure. I mean, I recall when just so your viewers, readers have some context on my career, back in the early 2000s, I was the first reporter to really investigate Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family and the whole scandal surrounding OxyContin. And I wrote a book in 2003 called Painkiller. And that book disappeared off the face of the map within a year after its publication. And, so as a writer, as a journalist, you're sort of like a little crestfallen. when that happens. Now let's fast forward 20
when
years.
You say disappeared?
It went out of print. It went out of print. It wasn't kidnapped, but it literally was abandoned. Went out of print.
As in they sold everything that they had printed, or they just
no? It meant that they sold just a few copies or a small number of copies. They pulped the rest of it, and they gave the publishing rights back to me. They basically said, "Okay, well, this hasn't been financially successful for us. Back to you." So fast forward 20 years or thereabouts, and I'm a character in this best-selling book about the Sackler family that Patrick Royden Keith has just published, called Empire of Pain. I'm in, and my work in about Purdue Pharma and OxyContin was in Beth Macy's book called Dope Sick. And, every major piece dealing with what really has become the biggest public health scandal of the 20th century sort of references me and my work. So I think as a journalist, the awards are nice, but it is extraordinarily gratifying to see your work recognized, not just in terms of a reward, because I like to joke to friends, it's like they give out new Pulitzers every year. But to see, that your work has longevity to it, that the impact of your work continues on, and that you made a difference. And I think that's all we really hope for in our lives as a journalist, and that is to make a difference. And
we're showing the cover of your book, Painkiller.
Right, this is the new edition. This came out in 2018.
Okay. And so the first edition is what?
2003.
An Empire of Deceit and the Origin of America's Opioid Epidemic, hailed as groundbreaking and a landmark work of investigative journalism. So this is an expanded edition and updated to bring it up. And you said this came out 2018?
Correct.
It would seem like you could keep doing updates on this story.
Yes, one could, but then I also want to write new books.
You do want to write new books. Of course. And to remind folks, Barry's newest book is Spooked, the Trump Dossier, Black Cube, and the Rise of Private Spies, particularly a role of spies in journalism and former journalists working as spies. So it's definitely a fascinating book. There's several other people commenting. Let's see, thanks. Let's see here. Patricia was thanking you for some of your insights, your discoveries, and giving a shout out to our team. Thank you. Macron Boot, shocking to learn how voices could simply be suppressed. Thank you for the question and answer. And let's see. Mark Lee wanted to know whether the book was pulled as part of the power of the big pharma. It's one of the biggest PACs out there. Did that play a role?
No, it didn't. I think, obviously Purdue Pharma did everything in its power to try to block me from working on this book and smear me while I was working on the book. But in 2003, I don't, it was like I was early, it was like I was ahead of the curve in trying to sound the alarm about what would be an even bigger disaster in subsequent years. So I don't think at that point in time, the public hadn't realized what was about to unfold. And actually, they wouldn't realize it for another decade or a decade and a half.
And right on cue, Laura shares, sounds like you were just way ahead of your time in terms of that story.
I think that's a fair assumption, yes.
Kudos to you on that. Absolutely. We have 10 minutes to go before we let Barry go. I just want to mention that next week, Shri will be back, and our guest will be another Pulitzer Prize winning, Pulitzer Prize winner, rather, author and sports reporter. Oops, I made a goof on that card. It's John Branch. Now, that doesn't look like Lisa Napoli. Lisa Napoli was a previous guest, but John Branch, and you can reach him at John Branch NYT. His new book comes out June 1st, and he'll be on the show the day before, May 30th, highlighting 20 of his favorite articles from the more than 2,000 pieces he has had in the paper. So we're certainly looking forward to having him join us next week. Before we go, Barry, I do want to take a look at the museum section with you. So we'll take a look at that real quick, and then we'll let you get on with the rest of your day.
Good, let's do it.
So here's the museum section, and there's so much else we could have covered. The Sunday Review around George Floyd, the What Women Lost, certainly something to spend time with on a Sunday afternoon. But this museum section, I don't know if I don't think it says a special section. I don't think it's print only. But as museums are starting to open, I certainly want to give a little bit of airtime and the way that they lay this out. So this section, again, it's a great example, reimagining museums after enormous challenges, 10 ways they can survive and thrive in a post-pandemic world. Opposite, a full-page ad for the Met. So this is a theme that we're going to see throughout this section, right? Linked by trauma 100 years apart, a really interesting article. A museum founded to ease the pain of loss helps give perspective. And a ad for the American Museum of Natural History, 150 years, New York rocks. An ad for MoMA, the Cezanne drawings against the art and struggle for equality. And certainly there is that connection. Sections as they've come out from the New York Times over the years, whether it's circuits, whether it's styles, there's that coordination with the business side. Certainly not on the part of the writers, and I don't want anyone to think I'm impugning anyone's integrity. But at the end of the day, the Times is, of course, a business, and they are looking to see what they can do to put out good content and get advertising support as well. This is an ad for the New York Historical Society, an exhibition about Katharine Graham, the former CEO of the Washington Post. Mesopotamia, a big exhibit at the Getty Museum. And these are all things you wouldn't see necessarily in the online on the digital version of the New York Times. The ads might be visible, but they certainly would be smaller. So certainly worth checking out. And that was, before I turn the page, the Morgan Library and Museum, Shazia Sikander, Extraordinary Realities. Taking art to the streets, aided by grants, artists are creating murals and more on the ground. And the Philadelphia Museum of Art, now open. The Asian Art Museum. Just some gorgeous photos, and certainly definitely getting some interest. We did a great show almost 2 years ago now at the Museum of the City of New York. We did a read-along from there. Stephen Kaplan was our guest. National Gallery of Art of the Nation for the People. And then a piece on the Faces of Power. The Medicis who ruled Florence lend their name to a show at the Met, but it isn't just about them. Some interesting portraits there as well. In artistic collaboration, it took a museum curator to bring two indigenous artists together. And that looks like, I'm guessing, a wolf. Here are the artists that they're talking about. Marie Watt and Kanupa Hanska Luger in their studios. Earth Becomes Sky. At Storm King, Sarah Sizzy's work explore the fragility of landscape and humans' fractured relationship to it. You can see the layout here. Honoring Juneteenth at the Source, a huge mural marks the beginning of the end of slavery in Texas. Again, some good balance and some good perspectives in this piece. So that is the museum's piece. Before we go, Barry, a last shot. What section would you like us to take a quick look at? We've got Sunday Review, the Sunday Business.
What's
Styles.
in Sunday Business today? My story was in there last week, so what's in today?
So your story was the cover story last week. This one is focusing on what women lost in the pandemic, and I think that it is also noteworthy that this is in the business section. It's not relegated to styles or something like that. It is taking this issue seriously. In the United States, 1.3 million mothers are out of work because of the pandemic. The absence of a paycheck has been a blow not just to their finances, but also their identities. Leah Duenas Torres was proud to be the family breadwinner after growing up in poverty. Then in the pandemic, she lost her sales job and spent her days overseeing remote school. It's crazy overwhelming. Jennifer Park Zirkle followed a dream of starting a tutoring business, but she has hit pause to stay home with her 2 children. This is my baby and may just close. Referring to the business, April Williams had just gotten the promotion to supply chain director. This is her picture. That she had worked toward for 16 years. Boom, I'd finally made it. Then her son's school closed. She tried to hide it, but was laid off. The pandemic certainly hit women harder than others. And we'll take a look at what else, how this continues inside. So here is the great What Women Lost. So check out that layout. Beautiful pictures across the top telling multiple stories. And then the text, What Women Lost. Loss of choice, loss of self-reliance, loss of a worker's purpose, loss of a mother's confidence, loss yet something gained. Doesn't feel fair that I should have to sacrifice my career, one mother says. As we're talking about the impact of the pandemic on women and staying on this, I would say that over the last year, as folks who watch the show know, I was able to join. I was working on live stream events with Sri. I left my job at United Way, a full-time job there, to join Digimentors to do this work full-time. I'm only able to do that because my wife is at home. She is able to make sure everything else runs, takes care of our daughter, 8-year-old daughter, make sure she stays on her computer all day long for classes. So it really does. There is a huge burden on women, and I'm certainly the beneficiary of that here at home. Dr. Chandrasheker is mentioning that they found in academic medicine, even when all conferences were virtual with no travel, women are still not asked to speak. Prior excuse was we wouldn't leave our kids. Wonder what the current excuse was. We certainly have a long way to go in terms of addressing gender inequities. But that's really the focus of that piece. So as we're approaching the 10 o'clock hour, Barry, I want to thank you again for joining us. We'll move back to the screen here. And really appreciate you spending the Sunday morning with us. We got to hear a little bit about your book, Spooked. In case people hadn't heard, Barry is the author of Spooked, about the Trump Dossier, Black Cube, and the rise of private spies. Had a great conversation about ethics in journalism and your career as well. Any final thoughts, Barry?
Well, first of all, I really greatly appreciate you having me on. And if folks are interested in Spook, I would encourage them to read it through the library, to buy it. And if they have questions about it or any of the issues raised in it, just reach out to me. So thanks again, and I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Barry. Appreciate it. Again, Barry Meier, longtime journalist with the New York Times, also worked at the Wall Street Journal and New York Newsday. We'll make a few quick announcements, but again, Barry, thank you for joining us. I hope you have a great Sunday. Looks like a beautiful day out there.
All right, Neil. Thanks again.
Thank you. That again was Barry Meier. We want to close with reminding you that you can still sign up for a social media weekend if you want to use New York Times Read Along as a discount code. You can get 20% off and still have access to the content for 6 months. So please use NYT Read Along as a code to get all the great content from Social Media Weekend. The website again is smweekend.com. smweekend.com. As I mentioned earlier, after this show at 11 o'clock, you will see She's on Call. It's a great show. This edition is all things COVID. Dr. Sojna Chandrasheker, who has been watching with us today, and Dr. Marina Korean are the co-hosts. And their guests today are Dr. Anna Felicia Ambrose, who is the Director of Research Rehabilitation Medicine at Montefiore Hospital in New York, and Dr. Elizabeth Parfit, who is an infectious diseases physician. So you definitely want to watch that, and they'll be taking all your questions around COVID and how things are working, some of the research, the expansion of the vaccine to teenagers and more. So certainly want to encourage you to check that out. And as I mentioned earlier, I work full-time with Digimentors, the consulting firm that Sri started that put on Social Media Weekend. If you're interested in having us put on a conference for you or do some social and digital media consulting, please feel free to reach out. We do webinars, talk shows, conferences, and more. So if you want to reach out, you can email me at neil@digimentors.group, or you can email Sri at shri@digimentors.group. And if you want to just send a note, we'll get back to you. You can also find information on our website and contact us through there. So again, Sri@digimentors.group or Neil@digimentors.group. This show is an example of the work that we do. We couldn't do it without a great team. Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julie Weeks and Carla Baranauckas. And part of that, I want to give a shout out to Carla Baranauckas in particular. She puts out a newsletter every week called The Local Connection from the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. Each week they offer story ideas and pro tips for journalists, and best of all, it's free. So please subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips, bit.ly/local news tips. With that, we want to thank you for joining us. And next week, of course, Sri will be back and John Branch will be our guest. Take care. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.